Thank you for the worship. It's such a great privilege to be here. A few months ago, Angie called and said, hey, I'd love you to come and speak at our church on discipleship. And I've known Angie since she was a 20-year-old college student, so it's been a decade or so. And so, of course, I was like, I want to do that. So I said, Angie, I'm going to pray. I'm going to check my calendar. And then she started being persuasive. You know, Rick, y'all get to stay at our house and have the week. We spend the weekend together. And I'm like, oh, man, that'd be so fun. So I'm like, I'll pray and I'll check my calendar. You know, it's Jameson's senior year, so he'll be gone after this. And Taylor will be in for fall break, and you know, you love being around. I know. Angie, I will pray and check my calendar. You know, Rick, Portillo's just came to Indianapolis. In the words of the prophet Isaiah, here am I, send me. Right? Okay, so that's how I get here. And it has been nothing short of wonderful, and I have loved getting to know the 70 or so folks yesterday who are, like many of you who weren't able to be there, pursuing this mission, becoming hope, trying to understand what this looks like, discipleship. And I will, by the grace of God, hope to bring you something that will stir you in that direction. However, this is your captain speaking. I've asked the flight attendants to stay seated. You might want to buckle up because we're going to be a little turbulent before we get to the end of this thing, all right? So hang with me because we're talking about the word faithful. And I and you all have something to learn today that the Spirit wants to speak to us. You know, the word faithful is Jesus talks a lot about the faithful steward and the unfaithful steward. And we hear this word good and well done, good and faithful servant. And then Paul says that this is how people should think of us as servants of God and stewards of the mysteries of the gospel. And moreover, what is most important is that we're found faithful. And then the author of Hebrews 12 tells us that we are to run our race with endurance, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, and be like those people in Hebrews 11 who had all this faithful life together. And by the time I've read all of that, I am ready to run through a wall to be faithful for Jesus. But unfortunately, that's usually not how it happens. I don't usually run through the wall. I run into it. And the wall is Jesus. At 1 Peter said it this way in chapter 1, as obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance. I'm going to put my glasses on because it's been more than 10 years since Angie was 20. All right, here we go. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance, but as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, since it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy, and I am into a wall. And Jesus said, you therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect, and I am splattered on the wall. Because I am not holy, and I am not perfect. Nowhere close. But I am a leader. I am ambitious. I have a flesh, a body, will, and emotion who believes it is more than it is. And I am a narcissist at heart. And so what I decide is, well, if I can't go through the wall, doggone it, I will climb it. And so then I just try harder and I work harder. Of course, this is an actual picture of my back muscles. And that's why I'm not wearing a tight shirt. It'd be distracting to you. So I perform and I produce because I'm going to do it. And I'm a leader. And if I want something, I make it happen. And if I don't like something, then I just change it. And I perform and I produce and I work and I climb and I go. And very quickly into my attempts to go over Jesus and try to be the faithful person I think he's called me to be, I wind up looking pretty much like this on my journey with Jesus. I'm just stuck. And all I can do is pray, help me, Jesus. And by his grace, he does. But he also says, you know, son, I appreciate that we've come to this place where you're saying, help me, Jesus. But we should have started there. Because as we're going to find when we think about this word abide, because abide is exactly what faithfulness, it's the source and symptom of faithfulness, our abiding. When we begin to abide, we're going to find it's not about producing and performing, it's about proximity. And when we gain proximity to Jesus, when we are beginning to access his faithfulness, when it's about his holiness and his perfection and his righteousness, which he shares with us because he loves us and because he loves the world and wants to offer himself to the world through us, when we begin to do that, it's not up to us to perform and produce. We just got to stay in proximity with him. and in proximity with the world he wants to offer himself to. And that's what we're going to talk about today in three reasons why faithfulness matters, why it matters to God, why faithfulness matters to you, and why faithfulness now matters so much to the world. And in doing so, I hope we'll understand more about what proximity means. So let's go back to the 1 Peter passage, chapter 1, verse 13. Therefore, preparing your minds for action, that's getting on point with things, and being sober-minded, set your hope fully on the grace. And there's the picture. We never look in the mirror of Jesus' perfection and his holiness and our call to that apart from grace. If we cannot see grace, if we cannot see ourselves in the context of grace, we're just going to walk away feeling so ashamed and so inadequate. But if we set our hope on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ, as obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance. But as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in your conduct, since it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. And if you call on him as Father, who judges impartially according to each one's deeds, conduct yourselves with fear throughout the time of your exile. This is a reference to the Old Testament. It's giving us the picture that the law was never enough. And the fear of God, not the fear of God's retribution, the fear of God's judgment, the fear of missing the fullness of who he is, life without him, and who he is as God. We could not stand before him apart from his grace, knowing that you were ransomed from the futile ways inherited from your forefathers, not with perishable things such as silver or gold, with the precious blood of Christ, like that a lamb without blemish or spot. Jesus has more invested in your faithfulness than you do. He has blood and body and death spilled for you to experience faithfulness to him, to abide with him, to pursue him, to know him as he is pursuing you. And so when we are thinking about faithfulness, we dare not get some small vision of faithfulness that's about getting it right. When we start to deal with the things that are in our hearts and our minds, those things that are not of the Lord, we dare not start to begin to say, well, I'm going to deal with my anger and my lust and my greed and by just trying harder because I can make that work. Because you can't. Or I'm going to do the positive things. I'm going to read my Bible more. I'm going to tell people about Jesus. As soon as we get done with lunch today, I'm going to start on my new journey of faithfulness. And you rev yourself up and you're just going to run into the wall until you understand who we really are. We are in an earth suit. It's called the flesh in the scripture. It's our bodies, it's our emotions, it's our will, it's our desires, it's all of who we are. And it is very powerful. And it is the way in which God brings us to a place. It's the way in which God speaks of himself. It's the way in which God makes himself known to the world, that he invades this earth suit. And he begins to walk out his life in us. And these people like me who are so arrogant and so idolatrous and so believe that I can make it happen. I can even be religious. I can even be faithful. He comes in and says, no, you can't, but I can in you, and I can be with you. If you will be with me, I offer myself to you. Ephesians chapter 1 says this is the whole point of creation. Before the foundation of the world, he chose that you would belong to him, to the praise of his glorious grace. When Adam and Eve sinned, God didn't go like, oh, good grief, they have messed the whole thing up. What are we going to do now? Anybody got any ideas? How about incarnation, crucifixion, resurrection? Well, let's go with that. It was already, before it even happened, it was already planned. Because this is to put on a display his grace. And when his grace invades us, when it really becomes a part of us, when it really becomes the God of this flesh, it is the penultimate picture of God's glory. It is how God makes himself known to the world. This is his plan. This is his design. Now let me talk a little bit more about flesh, because that's such an abstract idea. So let me bring it home a little bit. So when we get home tonight and we fly through Chicago, which means we have to stay there 10 times longer than you're supposed to, and then we get to Knoxville eventually, and we land and we go home, and I'm like, hey, I want a snack. Do we have any of those cookies that have that flaxseed, birdseed thing in there? Can we get some of those? I don't say, hey, honey, look, we have no rice cakes in the house. I'm going on a rice cake run. You want some? Why? Because my body is intended for pleasure, for taste. Like at Portillo's, I could have ordered a salad. But who goes to the Grand Canyon and stays in the gift shop? There's no way I'm ordering a salad at Portillo's. And there's no wrong in that, because there's nothing wrong with the fact that my tastes are so intricate and so powerful and so strong. There's nothing wrong with the desire for freedom. There's no problem with the desire for sexual pleasure. There's no problem with the way we love beauty and see things. These are not problems. These are made in the image of God. It's only a problem when they become the driver, because they were never meant to be God. And it is to his glory that this powerful earth suit submits and says, but you know better. You're good. You know better. And this was the serpent's entire argument with Eve. Yeah. He's not telling you the whole truth. He doesn't want you to be fully who you are. So you want to be like him? I'll show you how to be like him. You do what you want to do with those desires. And it's not just about cookies, is it? Or Portillo's. When I was in high school, I had this one girlfriend who, in the words of a country song, tore my heart out and stomped that sucker flat. So it was the great painful breakup of my life until I met the beautiful Teresa Ann Ritchie and fell in love with her. I was still feeling pretty low from what had been a very painful rejection for me. And so Teresa and I had been married for about 4 or 5 years, and I went away to speak at this camp. And I get there, and we go, and I gather and all the kids together, and we're playing in the pool, and lo and behold, the girl who is the girl leader for the youth group that I was speaking to looks like the twin sister of the girl who broke my heart. And she starts flirting with me. I have no idea why. But she starts giving me attention. She touched me at one point, and it felt really good. It felt really good, because that was painful, and that hurt, and I felt bad about myself for a long time because that girl rejected me, and now her look-alike, and my flesh wasn't smart enough to know the difference. My emotions and my body, they weren't smart enough to know the difference. By the grace of the Spirit of God, he was, and he said, you need to get out of here. So what I did the rest of the weekend, I would go I'd go eat in the cafeteria, take my food back to my cabin. I'd go speak and go by, participate in no other activities over the weekend, because I love my wife, and my desire is for her. But in that moment, I was vulnerable to my flesh, thinking, that would probably feel good. And if I don't know that about myself, I wind up on the front page of the local paper. That's the flesh. Surrendered to him. I got in my car, and I squealed, peeling gravel out of the parking lot, head straight home for my wife, hugged her, told the whole story, and said, I love you. And that was a lie. Faithfulness comes from the one who helps us understand the truth and the lie, and understand that there's nothing bad in being these earth suits, but we must understand they cannot lead us, but they also can't be fixed by trying harder. It's not enough to just to try and do better. They have to be surrendered to him. And that's why faithfulness matters so much to God. This is why faithfulness matters so much to God. Our faithfulness by grace through faith is the most visible expression of his invisible glory. When our flesh wants to move us this way, this powerful earth suit, mind, body, soul, emotion, all that we're in there, we have these strong desires created in his image, and they want to go off the rails, and they want to be about themselves, and the Spirit of God, by the grace of God, says, but this is Jesus. And you say, I want Jesus. I don't want this. I want Jesus to lead me. That's faithfulness, and he leads us, and he works with us, and the Christian journey of faithfulness is constantly going back to, I need grace, I need grace. I know that thought was not of you, God. I know that moment was not of you. I know those words were not of you. I know that action. I know my life is not being surrendered to you. I know I'm not being faithful to you in the gospel, and I need your grace. And he brings that grace, and he doesn't fix us. He transforms us from the inside out, so we keep longing for more and more proximity with him, and that's what he means by abide. And you can't abide if you're trusting your flesh, because you'll keep thinking, it's going to get you there. It's going to be enough. But I want to talk a moment, too, about why faithfulness matters to you. Because it is about him. It's not about us. It is about him. But my goodness, does it matter to us. Colossians 3, 1 through 4 says that our lives are hidden with Christ. And when he's revealed, we'll see the whole thing. So if you say, I want the best of life, then Scripture would say, then pursue Jesus, because your life is really in him, and you're not ever going to get the fullness until you're complete with him. But the closer you get to him, the more you're going to taste of it, and the more you're going to be able to do these things. Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you: sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. And that is wanting someone else's something so much that you would take it from them, even though it doesn't belong to you. In these you too once walked when you were living in them, but now you must put them all away: anger, wrath, malice, slander, obscene talk from your mouth. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have put off the old self with its practices and put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of its creator. Put on, put off. Put off, put on. Put on then as God's chosen ones. Hear that? As God's chosen ones, as the ones he's faithful to, the one chosen before the foundation of the world to display his grace, and therefore a part of how God will show his faithfulness and develop your faithfulness is expose you for the places where you're not, so that you can put on him. You're holy, you're beloved, so put on compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, patience, bearing with one another. And if one has a complaint, forgiving each other as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. And above all these things, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in one body, and be thankful. This is a tale of two lives. On the one side of our life is if we allow the flesh to be God. What I desire, what I want, what I define, what I am drawn to must be satisfied, because my pleasure centers physically, emotionally, mentally are the thing. Then ultimately, I may not wind up in all these places, but I'll wind up in one of them, and I'll help a bunch of other people find their place on this list too. But if, as his holy and beloved, I am learning to be in proximity with him, a different fruit will be produced. Compassion, patience, forgiveness, love, peace. Imagine a whole community of families who lived on the right side and not the left. Imagine a government run by people on the right and not the left. Imagine the headlines of churches throughout America consistently about how pastors were living out in the right and not the left. See, this matters. It matters to you for this reason. He is your only hope to be set free from life with you as your own God. He is your only hope to be set free of life with you as your own God. That's where the fruit comes from. That's what he means by abiding. It means you take these things, you say, hey, these desires are really yours. Teach me how to live these well. But it requires risking your heart and depending, and who wants to do that? Since this is an abstract idea, let me give you a couple of thoughts on it. One, it's a posture. It's a surrender posture. In Lookout Mountain, Georgia, which is just across the border from Lookout Mountain, Tennessee, near Chattanooga, there is a platform for hang gliding. Let me tell you how the platform works, because I've gone there to see hang gliding competition. You strap yourself to a heavier than air kite, run as fast as you can off the side of a mountain. I don't know who thought of this idea. It wasn't me. Not only that, between the jump off and the soar, you have to catch the wind off of the mountain. So this is what it looks like. Run, drop 30 or 40 feet, come back up. I don't know if they have corporate sponsors. If they do, it should be depends. Because that moment there, that moment, I am not willing to risk to soar. I'm just not going to do it. Because I don't need to and I don't have to, and that's fine. But that moment, spiritually, is what I need to soar. I'm going to have to run in the direction my flesh is afraid of. I'm going to have to drop the facade and be exposed for who I am and my tendencies to try to be God of this earth suit, so I can allow the Spirit then to catch me and to begin to lift me and give me the fruit that the Spirit promises, which is love, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control, the things that come from proximity with Him, that belong to Him and not me, that can only be produced by Him. And that's why He said to the disciples, apart from me, you can do nothing, but with me, you can bear fruit. You can bear fruit. And it has to be learned. And I shared this illustration yesterday with the folks who were here, and I want to share it with you because I don't want you to misunderstand how this has to be learned. The scriptures tell us that Jesus learned obedience. We misunderstand it because we think of the flesh like, you mean Jesus used to be disobedient and he learned how to, no. Experientially, he lived out the learning process to actually live a perfect sinless life with the Father. He lived in proximity with the Father, bore the fruit of his relationship with the Father, and then offered that Father to the disciples. But he had to learn how to do it. And I'm going to just suggest to you, if Jesus being perfect had to learn how to do it, we probably are going to have to learn more. And you're just going to have to learn some of the skills of this thing. Not just how to drop, but that's what discipleship is. It's learning how to actually live this thing out in my family, in my marriage, in my community, in my school, in my church. What does this really look? How do you actually do this? So I coach AAU basketball. And one of the things that I do is typically I'll take about a team about 6th, 7th grade, and I'll walk them all the way through their junior year of high school in AAU with the idea that they're looking to get athletic scholarships and play college basketball. Because I get them as 6th and 7th graders, I inherit all the bad habits they've experienced over the first part of their lives. Except for the ones who've been in my organization and have been taught differently, usually they have terrible shots. Because, if you've been around basketball, you know, if you watch the NBA and you play on the little video game, you dunk or you shoot threes and everything else is unimportant and irrelevant and nobody cares about because Sports Center won't show it. So you got to hit threes. So these kids, when they're 6 years old, go out to the three-point line and do all kind of unnatural things to try to get that ball in the goal. They shot put it, they throw it with their shoulder, they get off balance, like their mechanics are typically terrible by the time I get them. And so I take them and I say, son, let me explain. On the 7th day, God created basketball, okay? So, and when he did, he explained why he gave you this elbow. You don't need it to eat. Dogs eat without arms. This thing was given to you to shoot a basketball. So let me show you how it works, okay? When you shoot a basketball, you are not honoring God when you put your elbow out, throw your shoulder, and get off balance. He created this thing a specific way. Elbow in, it's a lever, and if you shoot the lever and he gave you any depth perception whatsoever, we can get the ball to actually go in the hole. But you have to learn to do it, and you have to unlearn because their muscle memory is horrible. Their muscle memory is usually like this. You watch a middle schooler shoot a basketball, like that. It just bothers me. So it just bothers me. Anyway, but if they learn to do this, so you learn muscle memory. You're going to have to learn the muscle memory of how to walk this out because your natural tendency is anger, malice, slander, lust, name your deal. But the way of Jesus, the way of the Spirit is to learn the muscle memory of, oh, I could do that, but I don't want to do that. Right? So when I go home tonight, I won't be having an Italian beef with large fries and a chocolate malt, partly because I'm not at Portillo's, partly because it'll be a month before I can do that again, right? I know that. Because you learn some skills along the way. So we learn those skills, and that's why faithfulness matters to you. But it matters to God because he loves you and he cares for you and he wants you to have the fullness of the life that he sacrificed to give you. But there's another reason. You've got to understand why faithfulness matters to the world. You've got to we have to understand that we are called what? Colossians 1:27, Christ in you, the hope of glory. Make sure your tray tables are up. The American default in our culture is for the appetite to prowl until it finds what it wants. The three major gods of any generation and any culture are sex, power, and money, because they bring the most pleasure and comfort to the flesh, and they run rampant, and it's killing us, whether it's opioids, racism, sexism, and human solutions will not work. Only faithfulness. I'll go home tonight, sometime I'll check my Facebook, and on my Facebook will be different representations of my congregation. One will be lamenting that no one listened to Mrs. Ford and her pleas of Me Too. And the other will be celebrating that Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh will now be voting the way he'll vote, particularly on Roe v. Wade. And I would say to you, wherever you land on that one, you need to have political opinions. You need to work on it. You need to stay on Facebook as you have them. But they're important. They're how we learn. They're how we grow. We are in a democracy. But understand, you have a culture. Regardless if you got your way this week, you have a culture that has no idea how to live Micah 6:8. He has shown you, oh man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. And your side, maybe some, but your side of that issue for the most part, conservative or liberal, Republican or Democrat, your side did not show humble, compassionate justice toward anybody except the people they wanted, because politics in America is about power and winning at whatever cost. One evangelical leader this last week, Jerry Falwell Jr., tweeted this: conservatives and Christians need to stop electing nice guys. They might make great Christian leaders, but the U.S. needs street fighters. I probably share many of the political views of Jerry Falwell Jr., particularly about Roe v. Wade. I lean towards a conservative Supreme Court because of that one issue. There's a lot of other things to be thinking about. But Dr. Falwell Jr., you don't bypass the character of God to accomplish the purposes of God. The culture has lost its soul. The nation is losing its way. And because the church can't differentiate between having its way and the character of God and faithfulness, we have lost a generation. I'll just get to you statistically. I could say a lot more, but I'll just show you statistically. Those born 1928 to 45, 30% were evangelical Protestants, kind of slowly eroding down to now younger millennials, 19%. And it's a precipitous drop to the next generation. And I know what it is. I know what everybody says. It's those darn millennials and all their selfies. All their preoccupations that get their face in this. That's why they can't see anything. Let me show you a picture that is 179 years old. This is the first picture of a human being ever taken. It was by a guy named, get his name right, Robert Cornelius, 1839. Guess who Robert Cornelius took a picture of in 1839? It's a selfie. It's a 179-year-old selfie. Millennials did not invent selfies. They just perfected it with technology. And here's what we say in our church, which 60% of the adults are between 18 and 35. 80% of the church, we have 5 churches, 80% are under the age of 35. And here's what we say: millennials are not the problem. They are the solution. But church, if we don't learn faithfulness in proximity with Him, in proximity with one another, in proximity with the world, they'll never know. Because most of them aren't coming to your church or mine. When you lose a generation, you got to go find them. And some of the most qualified people in the room are grandparents. Because millennials actually aren't all that excited about your tattoos and your hipster skinny jeans, but they would love to have some awareness of stability and something that lasts. And a little word the Bible likes to call grace, because there is nowhere in the world you can find grace except in Jesus. And that grace can take the blindfold off, because the flesh, when it cannot see Jesus, is deceived. It believes the lie. It lives the lie. It destroys itself. It's crushed under the weight of pornography and sexual addiction and substance abuse and alcohol and opioids and broken relationships and loneliness. And only Jesus takes the blindfold off. But how will they know? Febreze made a commercial that is the metaphor for the gospel in this generation. They didn't know that, they just did it. So let's watch it real quickly.
Starting today, Febreze will be conducting a series of experiments with real people right off the street. Meet Susan and Erica. We asked them to be part of our first experiment for Febreze Fabric Refresher. They agreed.
So I've got a 3-cushion couch.
Oh, I feel it. You got it?
Yeah, I never noticed.
Yeah. If you guys can just sort of take some deep breaths and tell me what you smell.
Floral, light floral, lilac.
Maybe even a little bit of citrus.
It's like when you have fresh laundry.
Even a little bit beachy.
Being outside, fresh lawn being cut.
Wispy white curtains.
Okay, take your blindfolds off.
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
Oh my God. Where? Hello?
Oh, you do this?
My wife is a therapist. One of her things that she spends a lot of time with is female sexual addiction. And as humorous as the commercial is, she will tell you, when the 21-year-old sits in her office and takes off the blindfold and sees Jesus, it is crushing what she believed was real. We lost a generation. Central High School in Knoxville had a shooting. The school was just an emotional chaos. The school was in a hard place. Young Life had tried for years to find their way in. Our trying to build a strong group. Young Life being a ministry to high school students. And our North Campus, our Fellowship North Church, the whole group of adults, like people like my age, the irrelevant ones, right? All came around and loved on all the college kids so they could go love on all the high school students. So they just loved on them and loved on them and loved on them and believed in them and cared about them. And somewhere out of that sharing of the faithfulness of God, somehow that proximity to Jesus and to the body of Christ and their proximity to Central High School, Mike Inman, who's a part of our Fellowship North Church, said this: we decided to pursue the school relentlessly in hopes that more kids would get the chance to hear about Jesus through a Young Life leader. If you want to become hope, if you want to become hope, if you really want to become hope, you're going to have to learn with the rest of us how to have a life that relentlessly pursues people far from Jesus. And here's what you must know. The majority of the people in this culture are far from Jesus. And the majority of those who are far from Jesus are even farther from people who are close to Jesus, but not at Central High School, because they relentlessly pursued them. And if you would choose faithfulness by grace to this gospel, in proximity to him and to his world, then you will reverse the trend of the church in my generation, because the reason millennials don't come to our churches is because they look like this. We're putting around, whether we like the sermon, the music, whether it's a convenient time for the youth group, whether it's a place we want to serve, and whether we like the person in their Facebook next to us, and the world dies for the gospel and Jesus. So join me and run into the wall, splat into him, and let him pick up the pieces and offer himself to the world through your lives. Become hope. Christ in you, the only hope of glory. Let us pray as the worship team comes up.